How did learning sign language to surprise my deaf girlfriend expose her darkest secret? My girlfriend, Natasha, told me about being deaf the second time we met, sitting across from each other at a coffee shop with her phone between us for the speech-to-text app. She explained she'd lost her hearing at age 7 from meningitis and learned to lip-read so well that most people never realized she was deaf until conversations got complicated. She showed me how the app worked, speaking clearly while watching my lips, and I typed responses until I got better at facing her directly when I talked. The whole thing felt natural after the first awkward 10 minutes, and by our third date, I'd mostly forgotten about the hearing part because she was so good at navigating the hearing world. 3 months into dating, I met her family at a big Sunday dinner at her parents' house in Maryland. Her mom, Linda, her dad, Gregory, her older brother, Callum, and her younger sister, Iris, were all deaf. The whole family communicating in this beautiful flowing sign language I couldn't understand at all. They were patient with me, writing notes on a whiteboard and typing on phones, but I felt completely left out watching them sign to each other across the dinner table. Natasha translated some things for me, but I could tell she was exhausted by the end of the night from bouncing between 2 languages. On the drive home, she apologized for how tiring the dinner must have been for me, and I told her honestly it wasn't tiring, just frustrating that I couldn't be part of the conversations happening right in front of me. That night, I started researching ASL classes in our city and found a community college program that met Wednesday evenings and Saturday mornings. The instructor was a CODA, which I learned meant Child of Deaf Adults, and she'd grown up signing before she could speak English. I enrolled without telling Natasha because I wanted it to be a surprise, imagining her face when I suddenly started signing at the next family dinner. The first class was humbling because my hands felt clumsy and stupid trying to form the shapes, and my brain couldn't process the grammar, which was completely different from English. But I kept showing up, practicing alphabet fingerspelling during my commute, and watching ASL videos on YouTube before bed. Wednesday evenings became my secret project, telling Natasha I had a work thing or plans with friends while actually sitting in a classroom learning to sign colors and animals and basic phrases. After 6 weeks, I could introduce myself and ask simple questions, my hands still moving too slowly, but at least forming recognizable signs. My instructor, Delilah, was encouraging but honest, telling me it would take years to become truly fluent, but that Natasha would appreciate the effort even at my beginner level. I started watching deaf YouTubers and following deaf TikTok creators, absorbing not just the language but the culture and the community that came with it. By month 3, I could follow simple conversations if people signed slowly, though my receptive skills were way better than my expressive ones. My hands still fumbled when I tried to sign, but I could understand maybe 60% of what I saw if I focused hard. Delilah suggested I start attending deaf events to practice in real situations, so I found a deaf coffee chat that met Friday mornings at a cafe downtown. I showed up terrified the first time, ordered my coffee and fumbling signs, and sat in the corner watching deaf people sign to each other with this casual fluency I desperately wanted. A guy around my age named Isaiah noticed me struggling and came over, asking in slow signs if I was learning ASL. I signed back that my girlfriend was deaf, and I wanted to surprise her, and he smiled and introduced me to his friends. They were patient with my terrible signing, correcting my hand shapes and teaching me slang that Delilah never covered in class. Every Friday morning, I'd show up and spend an hour immersed in sign language, my brain exhausted but happy by the end. Natasha asked once why I was so tired on Friday mornings, and I blamed it on bad sleep while internally feeling guilty about the lie. But I told myself it was a good lie, a surprise that would make her happy when I finally revealed it, probably at her birthday dinner in 2 months, when her whole family would be there to witness it. Month 4 of learning ASL, I was getting comfortable with basic conversations and could understand chunks of what I saw even when people signed at normal speed. Delilah introduced me to classifiers and directional verbs, the advanced grammar that made ASL its own complete language instead of just English on hands. I practiced constantly, signing to myself in the car and at home when Natasha wasn't around, my muscle memory slowly improving. She noticed my hands moving sometimes and asked what I was doing, and I'd make up something about a nervous habit or stretching my fingers from too much computer work. The lies were piling up, but I kept telling myself it was worth it for the eventual surprise. Friday coffee chats became the highlight of my week, and Isaiah invited me to a deaf game night at his apartment. I showed up nervous and spent 3 hours playing Cards Against Humanity in ASL, laughing so hard I cried when someone made a joke I actually understood without anyone translating. These deaf people had welcomed me into their community and were teaching me not just their language but their way of seeing the world, and I felt honored to be included even as a hearing person stumbling through their language. Isaiah's roommate, a deaf woman named Piper, asked me about Natasha and seemed genuinely happy that I was learning for her. She said it was rare for hearing partners to put in this kind of effort, and that Natasha was lucky to have me. Month 5, and I was dreaming in sign language sometimes, my brain finally processing it as real language instead of just memorized gestures. Delilah said I was progressing faster than most students, probably because I was practicing outside class and immersing myself in the deaf community. She taught me the difference between ASL and signed English, explaining that true ASL had its own grammar and syntax that didn't follow English rules at all. I started thinking in ASL grammar, understanding why deaf people structured sentences the way they did, and my signing became more fluid and natural. Natasha's birthday was coming up in 3 weeks, and I'd planned the whole reveal. I'd signed to her family at dinner, surprising everyone with months of secret study. I imagined her parents' faces, Gregory and Linda watching me sign, realizing I'd committed to truly joining their world instead of expecting Natasha to live entirely in mine. I bought a new shirt for the dinner and practiced my introduction speech in front of my bathroom mirror, refining the hand shapes and facial expressions that were such a crucial part of ASL grammar. Everything was perfect. The surprise was ready. Then Friday morning at the coffee chat, I saw Natasha walk in with another man, both of them signing to each other with the easy intimacy of people who'd known each other forever. My stomach dropped, and I froze in my chair, watching them order coffee together at the counter. She was laughing at something he'd signed, her face bright and animated in a way I recognized from our dates, and the guy kept touching her arm in this familiar casual way that made my chest tight. They found a table in the corner, and I shifted my position so I could see them without being in their line of sight. Isaiah noticed my distraction and asked what was wrong, and I signed to him that my girlfriend just walked in with another guy. He looked over, studied them for a moment, and asked if I was sure they were together, or if maybe he was just a friend. I told him I didn't know, but the body language looked wrong. Isaiah said I should just go over and say hi, find out what was happening directly, but I signed that I wanted to watch first and understand what I was seeing. The guy signed something and Natasha responded, her hands moving fast and confident, and I caught maybe half of it because they were too far away and signing at full speed. I recognized a few signs. Tomorrow, meeting, secret, and careful. That last sign made my blood run cold. Why did Natasha need to be careful? The guy signed something else and she nodded, then pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen. He studied it and signed what looked like approval, and they continued their conversation in rapid ASL. I couldn't fully follow from this distance. I excused myself from Isaiah's table and moved to the bathroom, positioning myself at an angle where I could see Natasha's table through the hallway mirror. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. I watched them for another 10 minutes, trying to read their signs and piece together what they were discussing. Natasha kept checking her phone, and the guy kept nodding, their conversation looking more businesslike than romantic, but that almost made it worse. What business could she possibly have with this guy that she'd never mentioned to me? They finished their coffee and stood up, and I ducked fully into the bathroom hallway to avoid being seen. I watched through the mirror as they left together, Natasha signing something that made him laugh before they walked out the door into the morning sunlight. I stayed in the hallway for another 5 minutes, my brain trying to process what I'd just witnessed. When I came back to the table, Isaiah asked if I was okay, and I signed that I didn't know, that something felt wrong, but I couldn't explain it. He suggested I talk to Natasha directly, but I said I needed to think first. I left the coffee chat early and drove home, my mind spinning with possibilities. Maybe the guy was just a friend from the deaf community. Maybe they were planning some kind of surprise for me. Maybe I was overreacting because I'd kept my ASL learning secret and now felt guilty about spying on a conversation I shouldn't have understood anyway. I didn't mention anything to Natasha that night when we had dinner at her apartment. She seemed normal, talking about her work week and asking about mine, her phone on the table between us for the speech-to-text app we still used for complicated conversations. I kept studying her face for signs of deception, but she was the same Natasha I'd been dating for 5 months. Warm, funny, affectionate, showing no indication that anything was wrong or different. We watched a movie with subtitles, and she fell asleep on my shoulder halfway through, her breathing even and peaceful. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and replaying the coffee shop scene in my head. The next Friday, I showed up at the coffee chat hoping to see her again, maybe understand more about what was happening. I positioned myself at a table with a clear view of the entrance and waited, pretending to practice fingerspelling with Isaiah while actually watching the door. She didn't show up. Neither did the mystery guy. I felt relieved and disappointed at the same time. Isaiah asked if I'd talked to Natasha yet, and I signed that I hadn't, that I was still trying to figure out what I'd seen. He reminded me that the deaf community was small, and everyone knew everyone, so the guy could easily be just a friend or colleague. His logic made sense, but my gut still said something was off. Natasha's birthday dinner was in 1 week, and I'd been so excited about the surprise reveal, but now it felt complicated by whatever I'd witnessed at the coffee shop. I considered canceling the whole thing, just admitting I'd learned ASL in a normal conversation instead of the big family dinner reveal. But I'd worked so hard for 5 months, and I genuinely wanted to connect with her family in their language. I decided to go through with the plan, but stay alert, watch for anything strange and how Natasha interacted with her family or any signs that she was hiding something. Wednesday night class. Delilah taught us more advanced conversational skills and reminded us that ASL facial expressions were grammatical, not just emotional, so getting them wrong changed the meaning of signs. I practiced with my class partner, a woman named Heather, who was learning because her daughter had just been diagnosed as deaf. She was nervous about her daughter growing up in a world she didn't understand, and I told her what I'd learned about the deaf community being incredibly welcoming and supportive. After class, I stayed late to ask Delilah about deaf culture around relationships and dating, trying to frame it generally without revealing my specific situation. She explained that deaf people often dated other deaf people because of shared language and culture, but deaf-hearing relationships could absolutely work if both people were willing to bridge the gap. She said the key was respect and effort, showing you valued deaf culture and language instead of expecting your partner to assimilate into the hearing world. Her answer made me feel slightly better, reminding me that I was doing exactly what she described by learning ASL, but I couldn't shake the image of Natasha and that guy signing about secrets and being careful. Sunday morning, Natasha texted asking if I'd come over to help her set up decorations for her birthday party, and I drove to her apartment with a knot in my stomach. She greeted me at the door with a smile and led me inside where birthday decorations were scattered across her living room. We spent 2 hours hanging streamers and blowing up balloons, working together in comfortable silence, occasionally broken by her speaking or me typing questions on my phone. Everything felt normal and domestic, and exactly how our relationship had always been. She showed me the seating chart for the dinner, pointing out where I'd sit between her mom, Linda, and her brother, Callum, and I nodded while thinking about how different that dinner would be once I revealed my ASL skills. That afternoon, we went grocery shopping for party supplies, and I pushed the cart while she added items, both of us navigating the store with the practiced ease of a couple who'd done this before. At checkout, the cashier tried to talk to Natasha, and she pointed to her ears and shook her head, and I automatically interpreted for her, a habit I'd developed over the months we'd been dating. The cashier looked embarrassed and apologized, and Natasha squeezed my hand in thanks. Walking to the car, I almost told her about learning ASL right then, the secret feeling too heavy to carry any longer. But she started talking about how excited she was for me to experience a full deaf family dinner, how different it would be from the first time when I'd felt so left out, and I realized she had no idea I wouldn't be left out this time. I decided to keep the surprise for 4 more days until her birthday. Monday and Wednesday passed in anxious anticipation, and I attended my regular ASL class where Delilah wished me luck with the big reveal. She said Natasha would probably cry, that it was such a meaningful gesture to learn your partner's language, and her words made me feel confident again. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep, running through my introduction speech in my head and imagining all the ways it could go. Friday arrived and I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that wouldn't restrict my hand movements, a weird consideration I'd never thought about before learning ASL. I drove to her parents' house in Maryland, arriving exactly on time with flowers for Linda and a bottle of wine for Gregory. Natasha greeted me at the door and pulled me inside where her whole family was already gathered. Linda hugged me and took the flowers, and Gregory shook my hand firmly, and Iris waved from across the room, and Callum gave me a friendly nod. They were signing to each other in rapid ASL, the conversation flowing around me like always, and I smiled and waited for the right moment to reveal my surprise. Dinner started with everyone sitting around the large dining table, plates loaded with food Linda had been cooking all day. They signed prayers before eating, hands moving in synchronization, and I bowed my head respectfully while watching through my eyelashes. Conversation started up immediately, everyone's hands flying, facial expressions animated, and I caught most of what they were saying because I'd been practicing with Delilah for exactly this scenario. Callum was complaining about his job, Iris was telling a story about her college professor, and Gregory was asking Linda about something related to home repairs. Natasha sat next to me, occasionally turning to explain what people were saying, not realizing I already understood. I waited until there was a natural pause in conversation, then set down my fork and cleared my throat. Everyone looked at me, and Natasha automatically reached for her phone to translate. But instead of speaking, I signed, "Hi, my name is Lucas. I've been learning ASL for 5 months, as a surprise for Natasha's birthday." The table went completely silent. 5 sets of eyes stared at me in shock, hands frozen mid-sign. Natasha's mouth fell open and her face went pale, and for a second I thought maybe she was happy surprised. But then I saw something else in her expression. Fear. Linda recovered first, her hands moving to sign. "You know ASL? You've been learning?" I signed back. "Yes, for 5 months. I wanted to be part of the family conversations." Gregory signed something to Linda that I couldn't quite catch because he was looking at her instead of at me, and she responded with a quick sign that looked like problem or careful. Callum's expression had gone neutral and hard, and Iris looked between her parents and Natasha with growing concern. The energy at the table had shifted completely from the warm family dinner I'd expected to something tense and uncomfortable. Natasha found her voice and said out loud, That's really sweet, Lucas. I had no idea," but her hands were shaking and she wouldn't meet my eyes. I signed to her. "I wanted to surprise you. I've been going to classes and deaf coffee chats, practicing every day." The word coffee chats made her face go even paler, and I knew in that moment that she'd realized I might have seen her there last Friday. She signed something to her family that I didn't fully catch, her hands moving too fast and at an angle away from me. But I caught the signs for problem and didn't know and need to talk. Her parents exchanged loaded looks, and Callum signed something sharp to Natasha that made her flinch. I sat there feeling like I'd walked into the middle of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Everyone signing around me and occasionally to me, but clearly having parallel discussions I couldn't completely follow. Finally, I signed. "Did I do something wrong? I thought you'd be happy." Linda's face softened and she signed. "We are happy you learned. It shows respect." But she trailed off and looked at Gregory, who took over signing. "There are things about deaf culture and our family you don't understand yet. Private things." I signed back. "I understand some things are private. I'm not trying to intrude. I just wanted to connect with you all." Iris signed something that included the word boyfriend and pointed at Natasha, and Natasha signed back sharply, her face getting red. I was missing pieces of the conversation, the signs flying too fast and my receptive skills not good enough to catch everything. Callum stood up abruptly and signed something about needing air, then walked out to the back porch. The awkward silence stretched on, everyone picking at their food without eating, the birthday celebration thoroughly ruined by my surprise. Natasha finally turned to me and spoke out loud. "Can we talk outside?" I nodded and followed her through the sliding glass door onto the back porch where Callum was pacing. Callum looked at us and signed to Natasha. "You have to tell him. Now, before this gets worse." Natasha signed back. "I don't want to. Not like this." I interrupted, signing. "Tell me what?" They both stared at me, and I could see them recalculating what I might have understood of their private conversation. Natasha took a deep breath and signed slowly, making sure I caught every word. "The man you saw at the coffee shop last Friday. His name is Kieran. We've been friends since we were kids. We grew up together in the deaf community." I signed. "Okay, so why did you look scared when I said I knew ASL?" She continued signing. Because Kieran and I are part of a deaf activism group that does things that might be controversial. We were planning a protest action. Nothing illegal, but we didn't want anyone to know about it beforehand. I signed. Why would you hide that from me? Natasha signed. Because hearing people don't always understand deaf activism. They think we're being too aggressive or making too much noise, which is ironic. We're planning to occupy the main administration building at Gallaudet University next month to protest their new hearing president. I signed. That's what you've been meeting secretly about? Protest planning? She nodded, but there was something else in her expression that didn't quite fit. Callum signed. Show him the rest. He'll find out anyway if he's going to deaf events. Natasha's hands hesitated. Then she pulled out her phone and showed me a group chat called Deaf Liberation Front, with about 20 members. I scrolled through messages, my ASL reading skills translating the English text from deaf people discussing strategy, logistics, and something about the hearing boyfriend being a security risk. That phrase stopped me cold, and I looked up at Natasha. She signed. Some people in the group don't trust hearing people, even hearing people who learn ASL. They think you might tell the university administration about our plans. I signed. I would never do that. Why would I sabotage something important to you? She signed. I know you wouldn't, but they don't know that. Kieran has been vouching for you, saying if you learned ASL for me, you must really care about deaf issues, but others are skeptical. I felt hurt and confused, reading through more messages where deaf activists debated whether dating a hearing person made Natasha less committed to the deaf community. One person wrote, hearing partners always claim to understand, but they report us to authorities when things get real. Another wrote, she should date deaf. It's safer. Natasha took her phone back and signed, I love you, but I also love my community and our activism. I've been trying to balance both, keeping you separate from that part of my life, because I was afraid you'd either try to stop me or accidentally reveal our plans. I stood there processing this information while Callum watched us both carefully. Finally, I signed. I wouldn't stop you from protesting or fighting for your rights. I might not understand everything about deaf oppression, but I respect that it's your fight to fight. Natasha smiled weakly and signed. That's what I told them. But they wanted proof. That's why I've been spending more time with Kieran, showing the group I'm still committed, still part of the community, even while dating you. I signed. You don't have to prove that. You're deaf. You're always part of the community. She signed. It's complicated. Some deaf people think anyone who dates hearing people is betraying deaf culture. Like we should only date other deaf people to keep the culture pure. The concept disturbed me. This idea that love had to stay within cultural boundaries. I signed. That's like saying I can only date hearing people. It's wrong. Natasha signed. I agree, but not everyone in the community agrees. That's why I was being careful. We went back inside, and the dinner continued awkwardly. Everyone now aware that I could understand their signing, which changed the dynamic completely. Linda tried to restart normal conversation, asking me about work and sign, and I responded in my stilted ASL, hyper-aware of every grammatical mistake. Gregory asked how I'd learned so fast, and I explained about classes and deaf coffee chats and YouTube videos, leaving out the part where I'd seen Natasha there. Dessert came and we sang Happy Birthday in ASL, hands moving to the rhythm instead of voices, and Natasha blew out candles while her family signed applause. The evening ended earlier than planned, everyone claiming tiredness, and I drove Natasha back to her apartment in thick silence. Inside, she collapsed on her couch, and I sat next to her, neither of us knowing how to start the conversation we needed to have. Finally, she spoke out loud. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the activism. I should have trusted you. I responded by signing, wanting to practice, and also wanting her to see I was committed. You should have. I would have supported you. I do support you. She signed. The protest is happening 3 weeks from now. We're going to occupy the admin building for 24 hours, or until they agree to meet our demands about deaf leadership and ASL requirements for all university staff. I signed. What can I do to help? She looked surprised, her hands pausing before signing. You'd help us? Even though you're hearing? I signed. Of course. This is important to you and your community. Just tell me what you need. She smiled, real warmth returning to her face, and signed. The group meeting is tomorrow night. Come with me. Meet everyone officially. Show them you're trustworthy. I agreed, though my stomach nodded thinking about walking into a room full of deaf activists who'd been debating whether I was a security risk. Saturday evening, we drove to Kieran's apartment where the Deaf Liberation Front meeting was happening. I was nervous, my hands sweating as we climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Natasha squeezed my hand and signed, just be yourself. Answer their questions honestly. They'll see you're good. The apartment was packed with deaf people, maybe 15 of them, all signing in rapid conversations that I couldn't fully follow. Kieran answered the door and studied me carefully before signing. So you're Lucas, the hearing boyfriend who learned ASL. I signed. Yes, nice to meet you officially. He nodded and let us in, and conversation stopped as everyone turned to look at me. Natasha introduced me, signing my name and explaining I'd been learning for 5 months. A woman named Simone signed, why did you learn? What's your real motivation? I signed, to connect with Natasha and her family, to show respect for deaf culture. Simone signed, lots of hearing people claim to respect us, then they call the cops when we fight for our rights. I signed, I'm not like that. I believe in your right to protest and fight for deaf leadership. Another man, whose name I didn't catch, signed, can you interpret for us if we need hearing communication during the protest? I signed, yes, if that would help. They exchanged looks, signs flying between them too fast for me to follow completely, debating something about trust and security. Kieran finally signed, okay, you can help with logistics, but you don't get to know all the details until right before. Security precaution. I signed, I understand. The meeting continued for 2 hours, discussing supplies needed, communication plans, media strategy, and what to do if police showed up. I sat quietly watching, understanding maybe 70% of what was signed, occasionally asking Natasha to clarify things I missed. The passion in the room was incredible. Everyone so committed to fighting for deaf rights and representation, and I felt honored to witness it, even as an outsider. Near the end, Simone signed to me, "If you betray this group, if you tell anyone about our plans, you'll destroy Natasha's reputation in the deaf community forever. She's vouched for you. Don't make her regret it." The threat was clear, and I signed back, "I won't betray anyone. You have my word." She held my gaze for a long moment before nodding. After the meeting, Natasha and I sat in my car outside Kieran's building. She signed, "Thank you for coming, for being respectful." I know it was intimidating. I signed, "They have every right to be cautious. Hearing people have betrayed deaf activists before." She signed, "Yes, many times. That's why trust is hard." I signed, "I'll earn it, however long it takes." She leaned over and kissed me, her hands coming up to hold my face, and when we broke apart, she signed, "I love you. I'm sorry I kept this secret." I signed, "I love you too. No more secrets?" She hesitated before signing. "There's one more thing I need to tell you." My stomach dropped, wondering what else could possibly be hidden. She signed, "The protest isn't just about the new president. It's also about the university's refusal to hire deaf faculty. Last year, they passed over 3 qualified deaf professors to hire hearing people who don't even know ASL. The deaf community is tired of being excluded from leadership in our own institutions." I signed, "That's terrible. No wonder you're protesting." She signed, "The university knows we're planning something. They've increased security and threatened to expel students who participate. Some people in our group have already been called in for meetings with administration. They're trying to scare us into backing down." I signed, "Are you scared?" She signed, "Terrified, but also angry. We have to fight, even if it costs us." I took her hand and signed with the other. "I'll be there with you, whatever happens." The 3 weeks before the protest passed quickly, filled with planning meetings and supply gathering and media preparation. I attended every meeting, gradually earning trust by showing up consistently and keeping my mouth shut about details. Simone started asking my opinion on things, and Kieran invited me to a deaf game night, and slowly, I was becoming less of an outsider, more of an ally. Natasha seemed lighter, no longer carrying the weight of keeping her activism secret from me, and our relationship deepened as I became part of this important aspect of her life. The night before the protest, I couldn't sleep. Natasha stayed over at my apartment, and we lay in bed signing to each other in the dark, her hands catching the streetlight coming through the window. She signed, "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know this meant everything. You learning ASL, you supporting the protest, you becoming part of the community. I never expected that from a hearing partner." I signed, "I never expected to become part of the deaf community, but now I can't imagine my life without it, without you." We held each other until dawn, then got up and prepared for what would be a long day. We dressed in all black as planned, packed supplies in backpacks, and drove to Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. The campus was beautiful, historic buildings and green spaces, and I could see why this place was so important to the deaf community. It was their university, their space, and now they were fighting to keep it truly theirs. About 30 deaf activists gathered at the designated meeting point, everyone checking phones and adjusting backpacks. Kieran signed the signal to move, and we walked as a group toward the administration building. Security guards stood at the entrance, but we pushed past them peacefully, flooding through the doors and up the stairs to the main administrative offices on the 3rd floor. We moved quickly and efficiently, having practiced this sequence in our planning meetings. Within 10 minutes, the entire 3rd floor was occupied, activists sitting on the floor of hallways and offices, signing to each other and setting up for the long haul. We'd brought food, water, chargers, and banners that read, "Nothing about us without us," and "Deaf Leadership Now," in both English and ASL hand shapes. University security showed up within 30 minutes, looking confused about how to handle 30 deaf protesters who communicated in a language most of them didn't understand. They tried to tell us to leave, but we ignored them, continuing our conversations in sign. The university brought in an ASL interpreter after an hour, and Kieran signed our demands through her to the administration. The president, a hearing woman who'd been on the job for 3 months, looked uncomfortable and out of her depth, promising to consider our concerns, which was obviously not enough. We signed back that we weren't leaving until they agreed in writing to prioritize deaf faculty hiring and create a deaf leadership advisory board with real decision-making power. Media started showing up in the afternoon, cameras pointed at us through windows and from the quad below. Natasha and 2 other activists did an interview in ASL with a local news station that had brought their own interpreter. I watched her sign passionately about deaf rights and deaf leadership, her hands strong and expressive, and felt proud and scared at the same time. Night fell, and we were still occupying the floor, having set up sleeping areas in empty offices and ordered pizza delivery through a support person on the ground floor. Campus security had given up trying to remove us, probably waiting for orders from higher up about how to proceed. The energy in the occupation was surprisingly positive, people signing stories and jokes, sharing food, supporting each other through the discomfort and uncertainty. Around midnight, a commotion started downstairs. I heard shouting in English and felt vibrations through the floor that suggested many people moving. Kieran checked his phone and signed, "Counter-protesters." Hearing students angry were disrupting campus. We all moved to the windows and saw maybe 50 students below holding signs that said, "End the occupation," and "You don't speak for all deaf people." Some of them were yelling, and though I couldn't hear it through the glass, I could see their aggressive body language. Natasha's face fell as she read their signs, and she signed to me. Some deaf people disagree with our tactics. They think we should work within the system instead of protesting. I signed. You can't please everyone. This protest is important. She nodded, but looked hurt by the deaf counter-protesters who felt like betrayal from within the community. The night dragged on with little sleep, all of us alert for any sign that university administration might cave to our demands, or that police might be called to forcibly remove us. Morning came with news vans parked on the quad and national media picking up the story. The occupation had become a big deal, trending on social media and sparking debates about deaf rights and university governance. I scrolled through Twitter on my phone and saw both support and criticism, people arguing about whether the protest was justified or whether we were being too extreme. Natasha's phone buzzed constantly with messages from deaf community members, both supporting and condemning our actions. Around noon, the university president finally agreed to meet with our representatives. Kieran, Natasha, Simone, and 2 other activists went into a conference room with administrators, while the rest of us waited in tense silence. The meeting lasted 3 hours, and when they emerged, Kieran's face was neutral, but his hands signed to us. Partial victory. They agreed to create the advisory board, but won't commit to hiring quotas for deaf faculty. They want us to end the occupation now. We held a quick discussion, signing back and forth about whether to accept the partial win or hold out for everything we demanded. Ultimately, we voted to end the occupation, reasoning that we'd raised awareness and achieved something, even if it wasn't total victory. We packed up our supplies, took down our banners, and walked out of the building together in an organized group. Students and media were waiting outside, cameras everywhere, and Natasha signed a brief statement about what we'd accomplished and why the fight would continue. The aftermath was complicated. Some protesters faced disciplinary action from the university, including academic probation and community service. Natasha got a formal warning on her record, but no serious punishment, probably because she'd been one of the more moderate voices in the group. The deaf community itself was divided, some praising the protest as necessary action, while others criticized it as too radical. Natasha struggled with the backlash from deaf people who thought we'd hurt the cause more than helped it. She spent hours on video calls with deaf friends and community members, signing arguments and explanations, trying to defend our choices. I could only watch and offer support, knowing this was her fight in her community, and I was still an outsider despite my ASL skills. 2 weeks after the protest, Natasha and I were having dinner at a deaf restaurant in DC when she suddenly stopped eating and signed, "I need to tell you something about my family." My stomach dropped, wondering what else could possibly be hidden. She signed, "My parents weren't completely honest about why they were uncomfortable when you revealed you knew ASL." I signed, "What do you mean?" She signed, "My dad's company, the one he's worked at for 20 years, recently fired 3 deaf employees and replaced them with hearing people. My parents have been part of a lawsuit against the company for disability discrimination. They were afraid that if you knew ASL, you might somehow get involved or tell people who work for the company, and it could jeopardize their case." I sat back, processing this new information. I signed, "They thought I was a corporate spy or something?" Natasha signed, "Not exactly, but they know how small the deaf community is. Everyone talks. They were being cautious about who knew what." I signed, "I would never do anything to hurt your family's lawsuit." She signed, "I know. I told them that. But they're paranoid because the company has been really aggressive about trying to shut down the lawsuit, threatening the plaintiffs, trying to dig up dirt on them, making their work lives miserable." I signed, "That's horrible. What can I do to help?" She signed, "Just be patient with my family. Let them see over time that you're trustworthy. They'll come around." But as I signed my agreement, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still layers to this situation I didn't fully understand. The deaf community's wariness of hearing people ran deeper than I'd realized, rooted in generations of discrimination and betrayal. Learning ASL had given me access to their language, but not automatic trust, and I was starting to understand that trust would take years to build, not months. The next deaf coffee chat I attended, I felt the shift in how people treated me. Some of the regular attendees who'd been friendly before now kept their distance, probably hearing about the protest and my involvement. Others were more welcoming, appreciating that a hearing person had stood with deaf activists, even when it got difficult. Isaiah pulled me aside and signed, "You did good at the occupation, but you need to understand something about being a hearing ally in the deaf community." I signed, "Tell me." He signed, "Your job isn't to lead or make decisions for us. It's to support and amplify deaf voices. Sometimes hearing people learn ASL and then think they understand everything about deaf experience. They start speaking for us instead of with us." I signed, "I never want to do that. How do I make sure I don't?" He signed, "Keep learning, keep listening. And when deaf people correct you or tell you you're wrong about something, accept it without getting defensive. That's the difference between real allies and performative ones." His words stuck with me, and I thought about them constantly over the following weeks. I continued attending ASL classes, now in advanced level with Delilah, and joined more deaf community events, always trying to be helpful without being intrusive. Natasha's family slowly warmed up to me again, seeing that I'd kept their secrets and supported their daughter through the protest. Linda invited me to family dinner again 2 months after the birthday disaster, and this time the energy was completely different. They included me in conversations, signed directly to me instead of through Natasha, and Gregory even told a joke that required understanding ASL puns, testing whether I'd progressed enough to get it. I did, and everyone laughed when I signed back my own terrible deaf pun in response. 6 months after learning ASL, I felt more comfortable in the deaf community than I ever imagined possible. I'd made genuine friends, not just Natasha's friends, but my own connections with deaf people who valued me as an individual. I volunteered with a deaf youth program, helping teach hearing parents basic ASL so they could communicate with their deaf children. The work was meaningful, watching hearing parents cry when they signed "I love you" to their deaf kids for the first time without needing an interpreter. Natasha's activism continued, though in less dramatic forms than the occupation. She joined the deaf advisory board the university had created, pushing for the changes they'd promised but hadn't implemented. She invited me to some meetings as an observer, and I watched her fight in ASL for deaf rights and representation, her hands powerful and precise. I understood maybe 85% of the fast-paced discussions now, my receptive skills having improved dramatically through constant immersion. But I also understood that I would never fully understand what it meant to be deaf, to live in a world designed for hearing people, to constantly fight for basic accommodations and respect. That understanding, that recognition of my limitations as a hearing person, was maybe the most important thing I'd learned alongside ASL. One night, lying in bed signing to each other in the dark like we often did now, Natasha asked me, "Do you regret learning ASL? All the complications it brought?" I signed, "Never. Learning ASL gave me you, your family, your community. It showed me a whole world I didn't know existed. The complications were worth it." She signed, "Even when you learned we didn't trust you at first?" I signed, "Especially then. It taught me about earned trust versus assumed trust, about being a real ally versus a performative one." She smiled and signed, "You're getting wise in your old age." I signed, "I'm learning from the best people." We fell asleep signing to each other, hands eventually stilling as exhaustion took over, but still touching, still connected. Learning sign language to surprise my deaf girlfriend had exposed secrets and complications I never anticipated, but it also gave me something invaluable that I couldn't have found any other way. A language, a community, a deeper understanding of myself and the world. So that's how learning sign language to surprise my deaf girlfriend exposed her darkest secret, which turned out to be not so dark after all, just complicated by justified caution and the weight of being part of a community that spent generations fighting to be heard in a world designed for hearing people. If you found this story about cross-cultural relationships and activism interesting, share it with someone who needs to understand why learning your partner's language is about more than just vocabulary and grammar. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.